Now entering Nerdist.com.
Mission Log Supplemental, number 6. The one with Scott Mantz.
All right, welcome everybody to the 6th episode of the Mission Log, Roddenberry Star Trek podcast supplemental. I'm John Champion, and I'm joined, as always, by... That's you. That's your cue.
Ken Ray. You say as always, but, you know, there was that one time.
Oh, right. I still feel terrible about that.
Yeah, well, you should. I mean, don't. It's fine.
No? No, I don't believe you. I'm going to lose sleep over that. So here's what we do on the supplemental, if you don't know by now. We get to do whatever we want. We get to talk with guests. We get to entertain your listener feedback, all that cool stuff. We get to revisit topics that were maybe controversial or interesting, deserved a little more chat. And this episode, I'm very glad to announce that we have a special guest. We have Scott Mantz. He's the movie critic for Access Hollywood. You can find him on Twitter at Mantz Movie Mantz. I want to get that right, M-A-N-T-Z. And he's sitting right across from me. And welcome to the show, Scott.
Guys, it's great to be here. Very excited to talk about my favorite thing, Star Trek.
That's really why you're here. You are a huge Trekkie.
Huge. I mean, I go back to when I was 6 years old. I remember the moment when it happened. I was 6 years old, and we were playing ball in the street. And my buddy, at 7 o'clock, he just drops the bat, runs in the house, and says, Star Trek is on, and I'm like, what the heck is a Star Trek? I went in and watched it with him, and the first image I remember seeing is Kirk and Scotty and Uhura and McCoy beaming up to the Enterprise, and then they fade in and out of the transporter platform.
Oh.
The Enterprise is going from left to right, then there's a big flash of light. It's going from right to left. They beam aboard with new uniforms, different uniforms, and Spock has a goatee. The episode was Mirror, Mirror, and I was hooked, and I've been hooked ever since.
And from that moment on, little Scott thought, when I grow up, I'm going to have a goatee.
And I tried that.
Did you?
I did try the goatee. It just wasn't for me. I'm not the evil Spock. I'm the good Spock.
Okay. That's good.
And that is so funny because we actually, when we were talking about that episode, we said, you know, if you're going to start somebody on Star Trek, don't start them on Mirror, Mirror.
And you know what? It's interesting because I would not show people that episode now if I was trying to show them Star Trek at its finest.
Yeah.
Like if I was trying to convert someone who didn't like it or didn't care about it or didn't know it, I would not show them an episode like Mirror, Mirror or The Doomsday Machine. I would actually show them Sitting on the Edge of Forever because I feel like that is Star Trek's finest hour in the sense that it is not just a great Star Trek episode. It's great television, period.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Sitting on the Edge, I might be tempted to show them Doomsday Machine too. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Sitting on the Edge of Forever is kind of like, it's got something for everybody.
Like, you know, also keep in mind, guys, that this was a time in the early 70s in Philadelphia where I grew up, which Philadelphia, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, was the first affiliate to start airing Star Trek 5 days a week after it was canceled by NBC.
Oh, wow.
It was the first city to do so. So, you know, 74, you know, when I started getting into it, you know, they were doing the show every night at 7, and because they were showing Mirror, Mirror, just, you know, do the chronology, they were showing episodes like Mirror, Mirror and Doomsday Machine and Amok Time and Metamorphosis and Deadly Years. You know, the second season is really as great as the first season was. Second season, when you had alternating directors like Joseph Peavney and Mark Daniels and Ralph Sinetsky, really hit its stride. It was, I mean, one great episode after another.
Well, and as of this recording, we're kind of early into season 2, but we've had really strong, you know, Amok Time, Doomsday Machine, Mirror, Mirror, even The Apple, which we were it was like a reluctant yes.
Yeah.
Does this show still hold up? You know, is it still a go-to episode? And maybe not necessarily a lot of heavy messages in these episodes, but these are the ones that really drive home the characters.
Right.
You know?
Well, there were definitely what I like to call second-tier episodes, which may not have had a significance in terms of being an allegory for the times or being a message of something that you take away from it after you've seen it. Like an episode like By Any Other Name is an episode that isn't really about anything other than telling an action-y and very funny story towards the end. But it doesn't leave you with much, and I feel like The Apple's the same way. I could watch an episode right now, and enjoy it for what it is, and it's because of the characters more than about the story. I mean, it's such a blatant destruction of the Prime Directive more than any other episode, I think, from the original show.
There's not a lot of time given to the Prime Directive in a lot of early episodes. We mention it so that you know that it's there and you know we're about to break it. That's kind of the rule of Star Trek now. If we talk about the Prime Directive, get prepared for us to break it.
Well, there was one episode, without veering too off track here, where I thought was really interesting to the sense that they really stuck by the Prime Directive, even though a prior visitor had disrupted it slightly, was Bread and Circuses. There's an episode where, if you watch an episode like A Piece of the Action, they go, there's Planet of the Gangsters.
This is wrong, we got to change it.
Yeah, this is wrong, we got to change it. The Apple, they're being fed by a machine. This is wrong, we got to change it. Yeah. But in Bread and Circuses, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, they're down there, they're playing gladiator games, and all they want is to just get out of there. And they change nothing in that episode. And that's what makes it such a thrilling climax, is when they're sword fighting with the guards, and Captain Merrick just throws the communicator in. They beam up at the last second, just as they're firing their machine guns. Yeah. It's a thrilling moment. They didn't change a thing with the planet. They just got out.
Right. Well, now you mentioned the Apple, and I'm glad that you did, because Ken and I kind of approached that from the same position, which is that anthropologically, this is just completely wrong. For lack of a better word, Kirk, the landing party, they go down, they just determine, okay, well, this is a machine in charge, and we're just going to destroy the machine, change it, and leave. Right. And from an anthropological point of view, this is terrible. I think, Ken, you made the excellent point that Vol, the machine god, actually was doing everything that Vol promised, which is feeding them, keeping them healthy for the people of that planet. So why in the world would Kirk and his crew then just decide to change it? There's that minor element of self-preservation that, the Enterprise is going to come crashing down into the planet. But regardless of that little detail, Kirk's action is really hard to defend.
Well, it's also hard to defend in other episodes. I know that The Side of Paradise is a hot button episode in which Kirk is motivated by selfish reasons more than thinking about the grand scheme. But in The Apple, their reasoning, which you could play both sides of the coin, is that this is not life; it's stagnation, and that's McCoy's direct quote. And they're not evolving; they're not growing. They are completely stagnant. This doesn't matter that Val is taking care of them. The planet has a worldwide temperature. Even at the poles, there's very little difference between the temperature. There's nothing wrong. Nothing is wrong, except that Val is going to destroy the Enterprise. Slight problem. So what do? What do Kirk, Spock, and McCoy do? They figure out a way to justify breaking the Prime Directive, and what happens as a result is they will learn to govern themselves and have a lot of sex in the process.
No, they won't, though. They won't learn to govern themselves because there are 20 of them. I mean, it's over for them. When he destroys Vol, he kills that race of people. I mean, they may now transport someplace else, or maybe more people come from Starfleet to live in this place that used to be a paradise, but I'm assuming since Vol was controlling everything, that it's not going to be quite the paradise that it was before. But there are 20 of these people. I understand,
But Kent, don't forget, they need a replacement. Now they can have lots of replacements.
Yeah.
And build their people, build their race.
They got to get with the sex.
Come back 100 years from now, though, and it's going to be like a scene from Deliverance. Okay, I mean, there are only 20 of them. They're not going to. No, we know there are only 20 of them because Kirk asked where are the rest of the people, And
Well,
Akuda says,
Akuda, yeah.
no, this is everybody. This is all we got.
This is all we got.
Yeah, we don't need more. We're fine. And you know what? They were until Kirk, completely disrupted their lives.
Well, just like Mirror Mirror spawned a whole spawn of sequels and offshoot episodes, and of course, I mean, there are books devoted to what happened originally in Mirror Mirror, and there are comic books that went off in a completely different direction based on Mirror Mirror. I'd be very curious to see what happened if they ever returned to this planet. In 100 years, maybe in Picard's time, is this race have they evolved, or have they succumbed to chaos? Is it worth a whole episode? Who knows? But it's worth a shot. I mean, you leave thinking, just like the way Spock at the end of Space Seed says, I wonder, be interesting to return to that planet to see what crop had sprung from the Seedly planet today.
And that's exactly what I was thinking. But when we finished recording the Apple, I thought, well, okay, Ken, you and I were very much on the same page about, look, Kirk's actions are terrible. There may have been another way to tell this story. If they had actually really struggled about the implications here of uprooting this group of people and breaking the Prime Directive, maybe made the situation a little more dire on the Enterprise, that they really had no choice whatsoever. But then you have a responsibility to the people that you just uprooted.
Right.
And whether or not you have to leave behind a crewman like you did on Space Seed. Of course, MacGyver's chose to go with Khan.
Or you got the crewman in the Corbomite maneuver who decides to go away with Balak.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think all of that is absolutely valid. Absolutely true. I just kept coming back to the Apple thinking, well, did we give a little short shrift? Because if regardless of the anthropological problem going on here with Kirk's actions, if you remove all of that and say, well, this is purely metaphor, it's purely metaphor about us as the slaves to Vol, whatever, the slaves to kind of complacency, the happiness, maybe you go back to the idea of this side of paradise. Are we actually saying something here about the problem of just sort of believing what you're given, just be accepting, taking what you're given as a handout by Vol, then you do not progress, you do not challenge yourself, you do not become something better?
Well, this is a theme that even now, after decades of seeing these episodes over and over again, the discussion has opened my mind right now to other episodes which explore those themes. Look at Who Mourns for Outer Knives.
Yeah.
They are told, you will worship me.
Right.
You will kill a deer. You will gather laurel leaves. And, again, Kirk is like, screw you. We have no need for gods. We find the one quite sufficient.
Yeah.
But that episode, Who Mourns for Outer Knives, and then you've got This Side of Paradise, where they could just be stagnant in their paradise. It was the hippie movement. It was 1967. And then you got the Apple. Well, everything's fine. It is paradise. Nobody's dying. You got plenty of food. Everything is cool. But this is what brings me back to one of the things I've always loved about Star Trek at its finest. It was about something. It was an allegory for progression, for evolving, for, what is it that Kirk says in Who Mourns for Outer Knives? But he says one of the episodes. He says, "We thrive on conflict. You take that away. Oh, and metamorphosis.
There you go. And that's your favorite episode.
The companion is taking care of Zefram Cochrane for 150 years.
Yeah,
but he's dying emotionally because he's not evolving.
Yeah.
So there's that theme on an individual scale, and in the Apple on This Side of Paradise and Who Mourns for Outer Knives, it's much more, I guess, global because it involves more than just one person.
Sure.
Yeah. No. You're
not going with it, are you? Okay. But thank you for listening.
No, it's a very imperialistic. It's a very Western idea. It's a very Hollywood idea. It's a very, I'm at the top of the mountain, so let me tell you how great things are if you strive to get to the top of the mountain. That's what that idea is. There are plenty of people on this planet who would be more than happy to just not have to worry about food. There are plenty of people in this country who would be more than happy to not have to worry just about food. So it's a great allegory for people who have the means. It's a great allegory for the people who have the means and who have that drive. But for Kirk to continually decide for other people that the way they're living is not the right way to live, and then make it impossible for them. I mean, he says in the Apple that he's going to give them freedom. Well, no, he's not, because they don't have the option of going back. We talked about this. I think we talked about this in the episode for the Apple. At the very least, the people in this side of paradise could have gone back to that planet and sucked in the spores again. They could have done that. That option was still there for them. I still think that he just, made that decision for them randomly, although he didn't actually make that decision for them. Starfleet did. In the Apple, he made that decision for those people, and he says he's giving them freedom. But the one thing that he's not giving them is the chance to keep living their lives the way they were. And that's easy for a starship captain. That's easy for a guy who's got 400 people at his command. There's a chick who comes on the bridge every now and then and brings him coffee. He doesn't even ask for it. Somebody comes and brings him coffee. Seriously. He'll be sitting there writing up something, right? On that, what I guess would have ended up being like an iPad or a pad or whatever, at some point. He's talking to Spock. Chick comes up with a tray.
Right, he just takes it. He doesn't even say thank you. I mean, what the hell is he doing?
Exactly. But if he comes to some place where people aren't, striving and building and doing, and if they're not pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps, then this is a crap society. It's not even a society. These people are barely people. Let's see what we can screw up, and then we'll leave them to take care of themselves. We might leave a Federation guy, but this is the other thing. It then becomes, we say this over and over again. I'm sorry. This then becomes us taming the U.S. This then becomes the West spreading across and saying, hey, you people who have been here for countless years, because you don't count years the way that we do. You people who have actually had formed some kind of society, I'm not really liking the way you're doing it, because, your belief in some sort of spirit thing is cool. But you see, I've got God. I've got Jesus. And by the way, I've also got trousers.
Trousers. And it's always about the trousers, isn't it, Ken?
And I've got a desire for this land that you're sitting on. I mean, there's just something, there's something incredibly imperialistic about every time Kirk goes in and decides that the way somebody's living, sure, they look happy, but they can't really be happy, because I can't imagine being happy this way. So tell you what we're going to do. It angers me.
I hear your point. Ken, and it is beyond valid, because again, one of the things about Star Trek that that I'm grateful for is the way time and perspective has changed my opinion about episodes that I liked a lot as a kid, but not so much now. The episodes I didn't really care for much that I now love, like Metamorphosis and Conscience of the King. And also about the actions of some of these people, of course, being Kirk. And I hear what you're saying, that these people are happy and they're healthy. Why should Kirk go in and screw it up? But at the same time, at the Prime Directive, this non-interference clause, when you have people who are evolving in their own way organically, and Kirk comes in and screws that up, yeah, that's totally a violation of the Prime Directive. But when they are living their lives in under control of a force or of another being that they can't control, it's different. They are not living in their own free will. And that's where Kirk says, wait a minute, this ain't right. And that's where Val screwed up. And that's where the spores screwed up. And that's why Kirk took it upon himself after, conversing with his first officer, that this is not right. We have to step in and change things the way they are. In the case of Bread and Circuses, that planet had been living, this alternate timeline of the Roman Empire for thousands of years. So it would have been completely out of place for Kirk, for even the prior starship to step in and change their society. Like the reason when they got to Sigma Iotia 2 in a piece of the action, the prior starship left the book there, And these people adopted their ways from a book instead of evolving on their own. And Kirk said, wait a minute, guys, this isn't you. This is us. We have to fix this. So I see your point, Ken, but there's my counterpoint.
And you know what? And Scott, I'll kind of go along with what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, to me, I have to separate the argument. I have to say that, yeah, absolutely, from an anthropological point of view, we can't just go in and screw things up. But on Mission Log, our mission is to look at the morals, messages, meanings of Star Trek. And I think one of these sort of big global messages that comes out of Star Trek is that humanity, and of course we can argue that the servants of Val, they're not humans, okay, so maybe they're a special case there. But humanity gets better when we overcome problems.
Right.
When we have a challenge and we are able to overcome it. And that's something that Star Trek constantly says, whether it's on an individual basis or as a group, what have you. And yeah, Ken, like Scott, I'm hearing your argument. I get you.
I get it. I get it.
There's nothing patently wrong with saying, here's happiness, but at what cost? And Kirk's there to slap that cost right in your face.
And look, the companion for 150 years in Metamorphosis has taken care of Zefram Cochrane because the companion was in love with him. Zefram Cochrane didn't realize this because the companion was an energy force. It didn't have a physical, presence. It didn't look like Eleanor Donahue yet.
Right.
But, it wasn't enough for him. He was dying. I mean, he was dying emotionally because he was bored. He was alone. And even after stranding the shuttlecraft there with Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Commissioner Hedford, they were going to suffer the same fate, dying emotionally because, the planet's cool and it's plenty of food. It's things taking care of us. We're never going to die. Immortality, what does Cochrane say? Immortality consists of boredom.
Yeah.
That's not living. That's not evolving. Yeah. And that's, in the case of Val, or even in the case of This Side of Paradise, while I definitely agree with you, Ken. I mean, I hear what you're saying about, the colonists were happy there. I mean, they grew a healthy appendix back. I mean, there was no disease.
Who doesn't want an appendix?
Turn on, tune in, and drop out. These people were living the dream on Omicron SETI 3. And Kirk stepped in and said, no, sorry, Spores, I want my crew back. I'm the captain of this starship, and I need my crew. So screw their happiness.
Well, again, I repeated. Well, I've never said that Kirk should not have done that with his crew. Here's the thing. The problem that I have with what you're saying is it assumes that there is a finish line. The assumption seems to be that we're going to get to heaven and we can stop right there. The assumption seems to be.
Okay. I think it's the exact opposite. I think we're saying that the artificial
never
happiness.
an end. It's without getting too cheesy with it, it's the journey, and we are always on a journey. We're always evolving. From the original series to the next generation. You're watching the original show, and the ideals and the technology, and they're on these spaceships. Exploring the galaxy, and the humanity has done away with greed and envy and currency, for that matter. But even by the 24th century, when the time of Picard and Sisko and Janeway, I mean, they're still evolving. I would like to see a Star Trek take place in the year 3000. I mean, where would we be then? What would the Enterprise look like? But we would still be human, overcoming, learning about ourselves.
You're only talking about one small segment of the population, though. You're talking about the tiny segment of the population that we see on starships. Those people have a drive to be on starships. One of the things that bothers me in the original series is they keep talking about money. And I understand they keep talking about money because it's the 1960s, and you're not going to get people to really wrap their head around the idea that you don't need money. But I'm trying to remember, Sisko's dad's restaurant, did he charge?
Oh, did he?
Why did he run a restaurant? He ran a restaurant because he wanted to run a restaurant, right?
Sure.
Because he was able to run a restaurant.
This food is delicious.
Okay, so he didn't have to go to anybody and ask for permission, and he didn't have to angle, and he didn't have to barter, and he didn't have to do all of the things that Kirk is constantly saying that we had to do. Sisko's dad wanted to run a restaurant. You know what he probably didn't have to do? He probably didn't have to go to culinary school, and he probably didn't have to intern under somebody for forever, and he probably didn't have to work and sweat and slave to get the money, to buy the stuff, to open the restaurant. That is the idea that we get. Now, maybe all of that did actually happen, but I don't get the idea that that's what he did. By the time we get to the 24th century here on this planet, the assumption seems to be that you can kind of do what you want. Now, I'm not saying you can do that to anybody else's detriment, but I'm saying you don't have to slog the way people have to slog today. And what's weird to me is it has always seemed like when we're talking about the Star Trek future, we are talking about a time where we have done away with greed and where we have done away with currents and we have done away with all those things that you just mentioned a moment ago. And yet, anytime Kirk comes across somebody who's done that, wipe the slate and start over. Now, there is a difference, it seems to me, between what was going on in the Apple and what was going on, say, in... why do I always forget the name of the episode with Landru?
Oh, Return of the Archons.
Return of the Archons is very different. There were people who wanted to break out of what was going on with Landru. Landru was literally controlling their minds. Like, they're walking down the street, and all of a sudden there's a high-pitched thing, and now they are all literally his puppets. That's very different than what was happening on the Apple. In the Apple, we do not know that those people did not make a decision to live that life. You're assuming that they're being controlled by something. Somewhere along the way, somebody in their society built that machine to take care of them.
That's a good point.
It did not just rise up and start.
Right.
They decided somewhere along the way to do that. Now, 10,000 years later, maybe they don't remember deciding to do that. Maybe they don't remember why they decided to do that or how they decided to do that or how the whole thing came about. But there is no indication that this is being forced upon them by anybody else.
But you know, because you brought up Return of the Archons, the similarities between Return of the Archons and the Apple
don't exist.
That they're both being
don't exist. The similarities do not exist. No,
they're both being run by machines.
One is being tended to.
Landru
one
speaks
is
English.
being tended to by a machine of loving grace. The other one is controlling.
And they are both controlling. You know, the difference is that the people of Val are feeding Val so Val can control them. In both cases, you are dealing with societies, one more than the other, where their destinies are not progressing organically. They are being controlled. One, in the Apple's case, you know, they're feeding the instrument that is controlling them. In Landru's case, it's just, like you said, they're just puppets who go crazy, you know, at the red hour. But, you know, but it all comes back to the way that, you know, I think that what the show has said and still does say is that we need obstacles to overcome to better ourselves. And that is something that has been explored so many times in the original series, courtesy of the two genes, you know, Roddenberry and Kuhn, in episodes like Arena. You know, they see this lizard attacking an outpost and they go after it and they realize, oh, it was just defending itself. Then there's Devil in the Dark. There's the Horda. This thing is killing our people and we're there to mine it, but it's a mother protecting its eggs. And then there's the Companion. Oh, it's this energy thing. It's holding us hostage. But wait, it's a lover. I mean, and it just, those episodes flip the perception over even on its participants of the crew of the Enterprise, where they go, wait, we were wrong about this. We are learning something about ourselves because we even at that stage of their evolution in the 23rd century, they still got it wrong. And they learned from it in different ways. But when you have, and they did it organically, but when you have something else controlling you, it's not the same, you know. And the difference between Val and Landru, well, I don't think there's that much of a difference. There's not enough of a difference for me to say Kirk shouldn't have pulled the plug on Val or Landru. I mean, he was right to do both.
All right.
You there, Ken?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, here we go. Wait,
All right.
Is he getting on a plane?
Touchdown in L.A. in
Yeah, right.
4.5 hours.
Okay, where is this guy, Mantz? Let me at him.
I do want to change gears just a little bit because God knows this is an evergreen topic for us.
Sure, yeah.
We're talking about This Side of Paradise and the Apple now and Landrew and all this stuff. But Scott, I do want to talk a little bit more about kind of your particular take on Star Trek. And, you've mentioned Metamorphosis a few times as your favorite all-time episode,
it is.
Right?
Yes,
okay.
That's right.
So give us just the nutshell summary real quick. By the time this airs, we will have already covered it. But give us the nutshell and why that one speaks to you so much.
Well, in a nutshell, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and Commissioner Hepburn are on their way back to the Enterprise. Commissioner is supposed to be stopping a war on Epsilon Canaris 3, but she has a very rare disease, even though the odds of contracting it are literally billions to one. So they're taking her back to the Enterprise to treat her. They get commandeered by an energy force that strands them on a planet, makes the shuttlecraft completely inoperable. So now they're stuck on this planet. Turns out there's a guy on this planet who's been there for 150 years and is actually the creator of warp drive. And they're trying to understand the nature of this companion, of this thing, this energy force that has held them there. Kirk wants to get off the planet, get Commissioner Hepburn back to the Enterprise and save her life and, in a sense, stop this war. But he is too blind, and all of them are too blind to see until they discover the true nature that the companion is a lover that is in love with Zefram Cochrane and wants to keep him happy and alive forever. And in order to satiate his loneliness, the companion brings these other people there, but that's not going to be enough. And this Commissioner Hepburn is dying, and just through reasoning, only the way that Kirk knows how, reasons with the companion in a way that you think might backfire, but actually works out for everybody, where tells the companion that you can't love the human because you are not human. And she goes, well, if I were human, I could love. And she disappears. And before you know it, she has taken over or combined herself or meshed with Commissioner Hepburn's body. So the two of them are one in her body, the commissioner and the companion. And finally, Zefram Cochrane can see that this woman was really special, took care of him, and is really just a beautiful being, regardless of its now physical appearance.
Well, this sounds like a celebration of IDIC, if there ever was one. Is that
infinite
the thing?
Diversity and infinite combinations.
Exactly.
Absolutely. This is one of a few episodes to do that. Especially, hats off to a few people for making this episode so timeless, in the sense that this is 1967, this episode was filmed, and you have an authority figure who is a woman. Basically, this is Hillary Clinton in space, okay? Then you have...
Which is, by the way, a new series coming to HBO.
Hillary Clinton in space,
yeah.
starring Lena Dunham. And then you have the director, Ralph Sinetsky, who's directed the most sensitive episodes of the show, like This Side of Paradise, Return to Tomorrow, Is There in Truth No Beauty, and especially the musical score by George Dooning, who's an Oscar nominee for his score for Picnic. But he directed, or he did the musical score for some of the finest episodes, like The Empath, Is There in Truth No Beauty, and Return to Tomorrow, which were also Ralph Sinetsky's episodes. But it is the way the episode starts off, as there is a threat, and the captain is acting on his instincts to protect his crew from the threat, and then realizing that he was wrong in his perception and embracing what is really going on here. And the episode turns from being sort of thriller to a very unique and beautiful love story that is very, very moving up until the very end. And that is why it has stood out for me, even above like action episodes like Mirror Mirror and The Doomsday Machine and Balance of Terror, and just the all-time classic like, Sitting on the Edge of Forever. This is the episode that no matter how many times I watch it, I still get a little choked up by it. So many people I've met through the years at conventions, at the movies, and whatever. They have so many different reasons for loving Star Trek, and so many of them have said because it paints such a positive depiction of the future. But for me, it was always about the characters. It was always about the characters. When I was a kid, that the prospect of a prosperous future didn't resonate with me. I was too young to appreciate that. But what did it for me were these characters, especially Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. I admired them. I wanted to. I felt like they were, and honestly, even at 44 years old, they still are my friends. I aspire to be just like them.
Actually, we met at a convention.
Yeah.
You were there as a fan. I thought that was so cool. And you've been to a lot of conventions. Tell us a little bit about kind of that fan experience and what you have experienced with the way that the show has impacted people's lives.
For the time that I was working for the company Creation Entertainment, they've been doing the conventions since 1971. I worked there from 1991 through 2000, and I traveled all over the country, managing and emceeing shows and meeting fans. And they really are, and of course I'm speaking as a fan myself, but I feel like I'm just so lucky and honored to be in such great worldwide company of such really great people. I mean, anytime you have an identity, every time you have a property, whether it's a TV show, a film, a musician, a band, sports, there's going to be a small percentage that goes a little overboard. And of course, the Star Trek fans do have that percentage too, but the vast majority of them are great people. They just are inspired by the positive messages, by the great stories, by the intelligence, by the characters themselves. And honestly, I was born and raised in Philadelphia. That's where I discovered Star Trek. That's when I went to conventions. And it is because of my love for Star Trek that I moved to California. I will say that when I was working for Creation, after a few years, I started to lose Star Trek as a hobby because it became my job. But then after I left, the DVDs came out, and then the Blu-rays came out, and I rediscovered it with a completely different perspective because I was reviewing movies by this point and realizing the brilliance of episodes like Balance of Terror and especially The Conscience of the King, which is basically Hamlet in space. But I digress. But it is the way I've been able to rediscover and fall in love with Star Trek all over again because of the remastered special effects and because of this 15 CD soundtrack and because of artwork done by Juan Ortiz, the way he's reimagining all the I'm just so thrilled that Star Trek continues to thrive, and I can't wait for the new film. It's a great time to be a Trekker.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Scott Mantz. Again, you can follow him at Movie Mantz. That's at Movie Mantz on Twitter. And I hope we get to do this again sometime.
That'd be great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
Incoming transmission.
Greetings, Mr. Ray and Mr. Champion. This is John at Quasar Sniffer on Twitter. I have a comment about Who Mourns for Adonai, and I know I may be in the minority here, but this is one of my least favorite episodes, at least philosophically. Not only is it incredibly sexist towards the female guest star, with her, she's a woman, she's going to leave once she finds a man, but it's also really culturally biased by a suggestion that the Greeks started civilization, ignoring the fact that they took a lot of Egyptian, Babylonian, Phoenician influences into their own culture, which, all early culture did. But also, I just find the fact that Star Trek is kind of endorsing an ancient astronaut scenario insulting, that the Greeks just took the images of Apollo and the other Olympians just literally from these alien visitors and constructed their entire civilization around them. I think that goes entirely against the humanist philosophy of Star Trek that I find so appealing. Even as somebody who believes in God, I find the philosophy that human beings can achieve anything through their own effort and through science and through, hard work and goodwill and the genuine compassion that we have for one another, well, I feel like this episode totally contradicts that whole aspect of Gene Roddenberry's vision and the vision of future writers of the show. And I think this sort of ancient astronauts or space travelers visiting primitive worlds, be that the Federation visiting other worlds or aliens visiting Earth in an earlier time, I think that stuff was explored much more effectively and in a much more interesting way in the next generation. So thank you. Sorry for the long-winded rant. I look forward to your podcast. Thank you.
Well, thank you for calling in, John. Quasar Sniffer, if that is your real name. I actually didn't think of it that way until I heard your message. And I have to say that there's a lot that you're saying that I agree with. I also kind of roll my eyes and start to pull my hair out whenever I hear about the ancient astronaut, ancient aliens kind of thing. And there's a great quotation, and I can't source it precisely, but I believe it's from the late 80s. But there's an interview with Gene Roddenberry, and he says very specifically, some of my favorite lines, where he addresses this idea that aliens built the pyramids. And he said, of course aliens didn't build the pyramids. Human beings built the pyramids because they're smart and they work hard. And I thought that was pretty great. Now, I don't think that... I don't think that there is a lot that is invalidated by Who Mourns for Adonai. I mean, you kind of introduce this in this science fiction context, and what they're doing within the show is, as I said in our review episode, boldly questioning the existence of God and boldly questioning the place of religion in that world that is created and presented by Star Trek. And you made some other good points. You said, there is a sexist undercurrent in there for sure. Ken and I point that out a lot in our show, much of the chagrin of some of our listeners. And you pointed out the idea that, yes, they are going with Greek civilization, kind of ignoring Babylonian and Egyptian and all these other civilizations that had occurred before. But I will say this, though. The idea, at least as it's presented in Who Mourns for Adonai, they are specifically talking about Greeks. And I don't think it necessarily negates the contribution of those other civilizations. So I think as a kind of shorthand, which we get a lot in Star Trek, a shorthand for Halloween when we look at, or a shorthand for fear when we look at Cat's Paw or something like that, this is kind of a shorthand for the idea of another race, another technology being worshipped by people who don't understand any better. And in this case, they chose to go with Greek. And in fact made up Michael Forrest with that very, very kind of typical, stereotypical look with the toga and the laurel wreath and all of that, like a statue. So I'm okay with some of the license they took in that episode. Ken, you've been awfully quiet. Do you feel strongly one way or the other here?
Nope. Sorry. No,
right,
I don't know. The whole alien astronaut, starting humanity thing doesn't bother me as much as it seems to bother you guys, because, I mean, that's not taking pride in humanity. That's taking pride in the single cell organism from which we assume that we evolved. I mean, we're talking about something that happened 5,000 years ago, according to that. I mean, when Apollo was here, right?
Right.
Even if you go to Prometheus and say millions of years ago, aliens landed here and they, seeded us. And so that sucks because we should be able to do this without aliens. It doesn't matter because you're talking about starting from, one step above Mr. Ugg. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it doesn't really bother me. I mean, what have we done in the 5,000 years since? I mean, you've actually got something kind of weird going on in Who Mourns for Adonai where Kirk is standing in front of God, right? Or in front of what had, served as God here on Earth and saying, yeah, you know what? We've moved on.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, getting caught up on the, alien astronaut, is what, started or at least, pushed humanity along. I don't feel that negates where we are and where we're going because, I mean, we were only pushed along. It's not like every 5 feet. Mm-hmm. We're not still waiting for manna from heaven. I'll put it that way. I mean, at some point we We pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and we built our own cars, and, did all the things that we can be proud of, whether we, started off as a single-celled organism or the monolith landed and one of the monkeys touched it.
Hey, guys. This is Benji Stanley calling in. I just finished your episode review for The Changeling, and I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in. This particular episode, you guys really honestly have me thinking a little bit more so than all the other episodes that you've reviewed at this point. And I really thought that your takes on all the stuff that this episode touched on was really interesting, because it's a lot of things that never even occurred to me before, such as the episode being similar to Star Trek The Motion Picture. I never really made that connection before, but now I can see it, and I thought that was really cool. But more than anything, what I was really wanting to touch on was to somewhat offer a counter-argument to Mr. Ken Ray. You mentioned in the episode that you tend to generally be more left-winged, and that's fine. Personally, I'm very right-winged. I'm very conservative. I definitely appreciated what you had to say. I thought it was very interesting. I'm definitely one of those people that prefers the fossil fuels. I don't have a problem with alternative energy by any means. However, I don't think that there's really much sense in not using what we have right now when we could use it. It just seems a little silly to me. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit off topic here. But what I really wanted to touch on was what you guys had to say about Nomad, and this is more your argument more so than John's, but really what you were talking about how mankind has created these machines and their intelligence, thus their life. And from your standpoint, I can see what you're saying, and for me personally, I have a much different view on that. I'm generally a very religious person. I'm of a Christian faith and follow the biblical scriptures and whatnot. And so because of my faith, I disagree with that particular point, that I see human beings as being created by God, by our Creator. Thus, machines created by us are machines. They're simply programmed by what we give them. They don't have that essence, that soul, if you were. So that was just my big thing on it. And so I tend to agree more with Kirk that machines are never going to be on the same level as humans for that reason. But I really enjoyed hearing your take on it. I really enjoyed just getting your thoughts on it. And I'm really enjoying the show. I really think that you guys are able to make good arguments and still be respectful to everyone from each side that they may be on, whether they're of a religious faith of myself or whether they be of any particular ethnic group, gender, or whatever it may be. You guys really do a great job of really looking at all these aspects.
Well, thank you very much for calling in, Benji, and for being respectful as well. And I'm going to respectfully disagree with you on a couple of points. On the first one, on the fossil fuels thing, I would... You can either take my word for it or you can go back and listen to the episode. I didn't say that everybody on the right is against alternative energy. What I said was there are some people who are. I actually stressed some. I also said in what I was saying that I understand the need for fossil fuels right now. So I'm not an all or nothing guy at this point. I was actually speaking against people who are all or nothing. It doesn't sound like you're an all or nothing guy. I'm not sure how it came out sounding like I was as well, but I'm not. So let me go ahead and just clear that part up right now. As far as the machine intelligence thing, I guess that's a question of whether you think we're going to get there or not. Some people do. Some people don't. Some people think we're going to get there and it's going to be awesome. Some people think that we are going to get there and it's going to be a terrible thing. I think the thing that bothers me about what you're saying is you're saying, well, those are programmed, so they're not real. I mean you no offense when I say you are also programmed. And I'm not saying, oh, you've been subverted by the man. I mean, God, you stated a belief in God. God didn't teach you English. And God didn't teach you to drive. You're programmed. You're programmed by the people around you and by your surroundings. And, if you wanted to argue then about is your belief in God programmed in, I mean, that's a whole other conversation that we can have, or I'm perfectly fine not having that conversation too. Just because something is programmed doesn't mean that it's not real. And if we eventually get to a place where machine intelligence is actually intelligent, I don't think we can say, but, it's lesser. I mean, that goes to the whole carbon chauvinism thing that we've talked about time and time again on this show. And as we have discussed, I am also a silicon supporter. I mean, if it gets to that point, I mean, I'm not gonna side with it. I don't know. Well, an iPad. I'm not going to say any iPad is worth more than any human being, because human beings have infinitely more to offer. But if we get to some point where we actually have an artificial, I hate that term, where we have a manufactured intelligence, as opposed to, one who grew up next door to me with arms and legs and eyes and, all the things that come with being human, it doesn't feel to me like we can automatically discount that. Now, again, that's assuming that we get there, which some people think we will and some people think we never will. John?
You know what? I really, really want Benji, if you're listening, and I hope you are, I really want you to call back when we get around to Measure of a Man in Next Gen. Because that...
See, in a few years, Benji.
In a couple of years, yeah. Because that episode is specifically about this question. What do we do when we are faced with, and I will use the term artificial intelligence, although manufactured intelligence is...
That's because you're carbon chauvinist.
Right. But when we're faced with a being, and how do we determine its rights when our scope is only based on human rights or naturally the rights of naturally occurring living things, and then they put data to the test. I think it's a great argument to have. I'm always fascinated when we see shows like did you see the Nova episode where Watson, the computer that played Jeopardy, was tested out?
No.
It's what's so groundbreaking about Watson is that Watson is just fed information. Now, we're talking about the early part of the 21st century, and Watson is even now a room full of computers. Mm-hmm. All right. And you think about computers that like code-breaking computers from the 1940s, and how all of that information, all of that data now fits on a chip smaller than your, thumbnail. And one day we will get to a point where everything that is Watson is also down into a computer chip the size or smaller than your thumbnail. And the idea behind Watson is that you feed it information and it can make it, for lack of a better word, fuzzy logic. It can come up with answers to questions, not just regurgitating data that matches. Like if I type something into Google, if I type Star Trek into Google, I get a list of 1 million responses back for Star Trek. Mm-hmm. But you can ask Watson a question like, particularly they're talking about medical applications for Watson, saying, I've got these symptoms where I've got a stomach cramp and I've got this and I've got a fever. What do you think I have? And then Watson will come back with narrowed down relevant information that is the most likely answer to the question, not just a list of sites that describe stomach cramps. It's fascinating stuff. And this is sort of the nascent steps into intelligence, making computers intelligent beyond just what people type into them. So I'm kind of with you in that respect, Ken. We will get there. I don't know how soon. I don't know what it'll look like. But then when we do get there, we're going to have a whole lot of interesting ethical questions about what do we do with these? How do we treat them? And what do we use them for?
And I think people like Robert J. Sawyer, who we had in the first supplemental, or the second supplemental, I guess, would say that we need to go ahead and answer those questions now.
Yeah.
Which book of his did I read recently? Mindscan. Mm-hmm. Is about people uploading themselves to robots. It's sort of a Roger Corby thing, but a little bit different because they're actually choosing to do it. And and what is their place going to be in society? And it's kind of interesting. I mean, I wonder actually if he would write it the exact same way. Well, I know there are parts he wouldn't write the same way now. I mean, just based on what's happened in the world in the past 5 or 6 years. And I shouldn't say I know that, but I would be surprised if he would write the exact same book again. But long and the short of it is, and I think he actually talked about this in the interview, I mean, it's the job of a science fiction author to sort of consider these things now before we actually get there. So, I mean, good that we're having the discussion. And again, I thank you very much for, disagree. That's awesome. Thank you for respectfully disagreeing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hey, speaking of Roger Corby, did you see that one of our Facebook followers wrote in? I can't remember which episode it was, but they said that they basically were going to have a drinking game that every time we mention Roger Corby. Now it's the third one.
It was I Mud.
It was I Mud. That's right.
Yeah. I'll bet it's going to come up. Yeah, somebody said, and I think somebody else wrote back and said 3 times in the first 5 minutes.
But isn't that incredible that here's this early episode, and really, all you sort of take away from it, if you're not deeply analyzing the episode, is, oh yeah, Ruck was huge and Sherry Jackson was hot and they made Kirk into a robot. But this idea, the central idea in this episode permeates so much. I think that's so cool. That's what makes doing this show worthwhile.
Well, especially if one of the two people on the show is, has his bag packed, ready to go to, Mind Scan or Corby Labs, whichever one it is. So,
right.
I mean, that doesn't hurt.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of Facebook, I want to touch on something. Do you like a good internet argument? I ask rhetorically to our entire audience. Something really interesting happened, and I'm a little surprised that it happened when it did for the episode that it did, but our whole goal here at Mission Log is to have these deep conversations about Star Trek and about the morality, the ethics, everything that's presented here. And it usually surprises me what episodes will kick off that argument. Because you think that some are going to go one direction and then they don't. And then others, you or I will just kind of make an offhanded comment. And then all of a sudden you get this explosion of feedback. So I'm always surprised by that. I'm surprised by the ones that do, and I'm surprised by the ones that don't. Mm-hmm. Perfect example, Who Mourns for Adonai? We had that call earlier from John, Quasar Sniffer. And we actually did not get a lot of feedback for that episode. And I thought, okay, here we are. We're taking on religion. We're taking on God. We're doing all that. Really didn't get that much feedback, relatively speaking. But one that did generated this, I'll use the word kerfuffle, on our Facebook page in particular, is Mirror Mirror. And it's another one of those situations where you look at Mirror Mirror and you go, oh, yeah, it's Spock with a beard, it's Uhura showing her midriff, and they fight it out, and you get him back to the right universe. Mm-hmm. End of story. No, I'm here to tell you, Ken, not the end of the story. I made a comment toward the end of that episode about Kirk's impassioned plea to Spock right before, to alt Spock right before they beam back. And I made a comment about how Kirk appeals to Spock's logical side to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really fascinating. And it kicked off this big, heated, fortunately very intelligent argument on our Facebook page between Bill and Robert. So if you want to check it out, go to the Facebook page and look at the entry for Mirror Mirror. There's a picture of bearded Spock right there, so you can find it pretty easily. And they really, they both basically wrote a book on this. You could publish this thing and it would be fascinating reading. I don't want to get into the argument here for a number of reasons. A, I'm not a moral philosopher. Neither of you can, I don't think, unless you're hiding something from me. But I do want to address, though, just the very idea of how we are addressing morals on this show. because basically the first volley in this argument was Bill saying, I find it fascinating that the discussion again touches on the origin of morality. And he wraps up his argument by saying it's silly wishful thinking to think that morality can come from any place other than God. And there are many deeply nuanced and fascinating arguments to be made on either side of that. I think it is a really valuable, really important argument to have, and there are great people on either side. Just say, yes, you need God for morality, or no, you don't need God for morality. I know which side I fall on mostly, and Ken, this may be something that you have kicked around quite a bit in your life as well. I think what's important here, though, what I want to address is the idea that, Ken, you and I aren't doing this show from a particular point of view.
You apparently haven't read our Facebook page. I have an atheist agenda.
Well, okay. So let's talk about that. We have our biases, we have our beliefs, and we have our own philosophies. But here's the thing: the goal, and we may come close to that goal or further away from that goal, depending on when you catch us. But our goal is to address what is presented in Star Trek. So it'd be a very different thing if either Star Trek were starting out from a point of view saying, here is biblical philosophy in the context of a science fiction universe. And then you and I could go, oh, okay, yeah, that is or is not. Mm-hmm. Or it would be a different thing if you and I were starting our show from the point of view of saying, we are going to examine Star Trek, but we're going to do it from a biblical point of view or a religious point of view, even if it's not Christian theology. Mm-hmm. But what's really important for me to get across is that you and I sit there and watch the episodes and we go, okay, here's a moral point, or here's an ethical dilemma. And the only context that we really have is the context of Star Trek. What are they saying about that belief, that philosophy, that morality, that ethical dilemma? How do they approach it? So far, correct me if I'm wrong, so far there hasn't been a big reliance on traditional theology or the calling out of God to make those pronouncements on Star Trek. It's usually something to do with either an appeal to logic, sometimes an appeal to motion, Kirk making an appeal to sort of generically the idea of freedom, of sort of the individual ability to make decisions. These are the things that I get out of Star Trek. And it's going to be fascinating when we get to the end of the original series, and then again when we get to the end of Next Gen and the other series, to kind of paint the big picture and say, well, in every individual episodes we got these kind of messages, but by the time we got to the end of it, here are the big overarching comments that we're getting on or getting out of Star Trek. So that's really all I wanted to say about that. I mean, I will leave the argument with this. Ken, are you familiar with Euthyphro?
That's like a frozen yogurt with like a sprinkled topping.
It's delicious. It's really delicious.
I am not familiar with whatever you just said.
Euthyphro. So this is one of the earliest arguments about this position about where does morality come from? Does morality come from God? It's a dialogue. It is a dialogue between Euthyphro and Socrates, written by Plato. And the idea essentially comes down to this. Socrates is asking Euthyphro questions about what is moral. And Euthyphro is trying to come up with these descriptions of morality. And he's saying, well, it pleases the gods. And then it finally comes down to this. The question becomes, is something morally right because God commands it, or does God command it because it is morally right? And whichever way you answer the question, you kind of have this problem, because if it's something I should say it this way. If something is morally right because God commands it, then it assumes that the moral lesson exists outside of God's command. Okay? And then if God commands it because it is right, then there's no particular principle to be learned. There's nothing that you would otherwise pick up. It's just that, okay, well, God says it is, therefore we must do it.
I gotta say, and forgive me.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're full of beans. I mean, you just are.
What do you mean?
But you said,
how do you mean I'm full of beans?
I don't want to get into this discussion, you said. And you said several times you don't want to get into this discussion. You made like 4 points, but you don't want to have the argument. And that's, I mean, if that's what you want to do, go for it. But just as we sometimes call Star Trek out, we will also call each other out. I got to call you out on that one, dude.
That's fair.
Have the argument or don't have the argument. But don't say, I don't want to have the argument. Let me just say.
Well, but here's the reason that I brought up Euthyphro and brought up this stuff, because I'm trying to make the point that this argument is older than a specific religion. Mm-hmm. It's certainly older than modern moral philosophy, and there are a lot of moral philosophers that I think are very interesting to listen to, very interesting to watch. I mentioned Sam Harris in particular in the Mirror Mirror episode, but there are a lot of others that we could pull from. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing, and thank you for calling me out. That's fine. My point is that the argument has been going on and on and on, and it isn't specifically an argument tied to Christian theology. It's an argument about morality, and we all bring our own points of view to it, and whether you follow one particular religion or not, obviously that will help to inform the argument that you make. So yes and no. Yeah, I don't want to just sit here and go tit for tat to argue every point made by Bill or every point made by Robert. They did that very well online. My point is just to say we're trying to approach morality simply as what is shown to us in Star Trek. And by the way, this argument isn't something that you and I created. Yeah. That was something that I kind of got the impression of from Bill's initial comment. He's like, oh, I find it amusing that Ken and John keep throwing this in there. Well, the argument about morality is older than me and you.
Right. So
that's really the issue at hand. I kind of got on a soapbox. I apologize for that.
No, you're fine. I'm sorry if I'm sorry if that seemed mean.
No, not at all.
Can we address another episode that had some interesting feedback come from it?
Absolutely.
I Mud.
What?
I know.
What?
I know. You were a little surprised at the stuff that I presented in I Mud. And the feedback that we got, generally speaking, was just have fun with it.
Yeah.
That it was just a fun episode and we should just have fun with it. To put it in its harshest terms, we're not allowed to just have fun.
Right.
I mean, we do have fun. I thoroughly enjoy it. I kind of felt bad for Scott in the interview earlier, and I certainly hope this doesn't happen to us, but he said in the interview earlier that when he was working for Creation, for as many years as he was working for Creation, he lost the fun of Star Trek because it became his job. And it was only after he quit working for Creation for a while that he was able to go back and refine Star Trek as something fun. At this point, I still find it fun. But
agreed.
We're actually charged to go through and find the messages, morals, and meanings of every episode of Star Trek. Take it apart. We actually say that every time. We take it apart to find the messages, morals, and meanings and figure out whether the episode stands the test of time. So right. I would say, almost as a self-defense mechanism on your part, if there is an episode that you love above all others and don't want to hear anything bad about, maybe don't listen to that mission log, because we're not always going to say something bad about every episode of mission log, but where we are charged with, really trying to take it apart and suss stuff out of it, there's a chance we will. So I certainly didn't mean to offend anybody by doing what we do with every episode of Star Trek when we did that with I Mud. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. And please continue to. I mean, I don't want anything that we say or do to detract from anybody's enjoyment of it. It's just, you know, we have this thing that we're supposed to do, and so we do that thing we do.
We did get some email back from people saying, wow, I never looked at that episode that way. That is the greatest compliment. Is when we get an email from somebody saying that, or you challenged my idea.
Somebody actually wrote to us and thanked us for pulling something interesting out of that episode.
Yeah,
which,
right.
You know, I was sort of surprised to see that, but, you know, and you're welcome. And so, yeah.
Hello, Mission Log. Oren here from All Things Trek. I was sad to note that I missed the supplemental episode on This Side of Paradise, but I hope this little bit of feedback is still welcome. I just wanted to register my complete 100% support for Ken's position on This Side of Paradise. This is an episode in which Kirk tells me that it is not okay to actually be happy. I must strive for happiness, but if I ever achieve it, that's actually wrong. I must continue to build spaceships and giant buildings and go and colonize worlds for no other reason than because that is what will lead to happiness. Not ever achieving it, mind you, but will struggle to get there. I think that episode was a clumsy attempt to satirize the counterculture movements of the 60s, along with The Way to Eden. And I found that very unfortunate considering Star Trek's normal history of social progressiveness. In any case, I would love to discuss this topic in more detail. However, I will try to keep this to a short length. And again, I just want to register that, Ken, don't let anyone tell you you're wrong, because you are 100% correct. All Things Trek, signing off.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to register my complete 100% support for your 100% support of me, Oren. And my position there. I got to say, shout out to Girl in Four Colors on Twitter as well. She sort of made a similar argument over 1, 2, 3 tweets, which I will read to you. They're 140 characters or less. So what? You got a bus to catch? Ken, I just want you to know that I am on your side in literally every happiness debate you two have. A lot of people never have the chance to strive for happiness because they're too busy striving for survival. The idea that striving for happiness is more important than happiness itself only comes from people who are already happy. It's an interesting idea. And oddly enough, one that I will support because, you know, for all the reasons that we've talked about many times, and I'm sure we will hit again a time or two.
I love it when you feel validated, Ken.
Well, it happens so rarely. You know, fast forward. Yeah. First half of this show, man. First half of this show. That's all I'm saying. All right. First half of this show.
Well, if you find people who are listening right now want to chime in with your 2 cents for or against, either way, however it is that you feel about what we're discussing on Mission Log, you can reach out to us at Facebook, Skype, and Twitter, all at the handle Mission Log Pod. You can call us at 323-522-5641, 323-522-5641. You can email us the old-timey way at missionlog@roddenberry.com. And don't forget, we have a beautiful homepage at missionlogpodcast.com. Remember, we may use your comments in an upcoming episode of Mission Log.
Speaking of which, more of those all the time. Please keep the channel open.
Now leaving Nerdist.com.